Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm doing a double feature for Kraftwerk, talking about both the mix and minimum maximum. Okay, so some of you may have noticed in my Tour de France review that I mentioned skipping over an album while talking about that. See, the reason I saved these albums for now is that there's no actual new material in either of these albums. Well, technically there is, but it's all modernized versions of their older material. The mix is considered by some, including apparently Ralph Witter himself, as evidenced by its inclusion on 3D The Catalog, to be a mainline Kraftwerk album, and I don't. I consider it more of a compilation more than anything, but the point is, this compilation showed all sorts of new reworked arrangements of older Kraftwerk stuff. And Minimum Maximum was just a live album that ordinarily I wouldn't be spending time discussing, but I feel like I kind of have to in order to draw a comparison between the two. So, okay, the mix. Now, what is interesting about the mix is that the general consensus seems to be it was not good. It's not looked upon fondly by fans, at least not the ones I've seen, and many consider it to be an insult upon their career. I, for one, again, disagree. I don't think it's that bad at all, and as I've said over the course of many of these Kraftwerk reviews, I actually have more nostalgia for certain tracks from here than the originals. So here's the thing, there are two major criticisms I often see for this compilation. The first one is that these arrangements make Kraftwerk sound like they're stuck in the 90s and take away the sense of timelessness that the previous albums had. I can kinda see where this one's coming from, but again, I'll have to straight disagree on this point. I have no problems with these particular arrangements. Maybe it's just that I'm particularly biased towards this era of electronic music, but for the most part that whole timelessness thing doesn't apply to me quite so much. I suppose it doesn't help that I don't actually consider most Kraftwerk albums to actually be timeless, but point is, I quite like these arrangements. Well, they're not all great, but several of them I think are in some ways improvements on the originals, make them sound, more futuristic. So okay, the good ones. There are a few that particularly stick out to me in this department. First is Autobahn. This version does in fact update what was originally this super long prog rock track and shortens it down significantly to 9 minutes, making it much more concise and also, bouncier, it flows together better. I think it perfectly keeps up with the spirit of the original despite being modernized. There's also like a particularly cool section near the end where they take some generated voices and they make them do barbershop singing. I've never actually seen anyone else do that before. So yeah, I think this particular version of Autobahn might actually be my favorite version of Autobahn. So other standouts for me include Radioactivity, which has a really tight bass line and really makes it more of a fun dance track, despite, not taking away from its heavy atmosphere. I also like Trans-Europe Express. Turns what used to sound super old-timey and creepy into something that comes off to me much classier, more refined, smoother, but again, still retaining that dramatic charm the original had and giving it that more modern and more futuristic flair. And I also have to give special mention to probably my favorite track on the mix, which is this new version of Computer Love. While, okay, I will have to admit a little bit of the warmness of the original is not really present here. I remember hearing this version for the first time and being absolutely mind-blown. Just all the different rhythms and melodies that come in, like especially that new kind of spastic and erratic one in the intro of this track, and the way they get it to mesh so well with the original melodies. Nothing on this compilation captivated me nearly as much as this track did. In fact, for the longest time, I actually liked it significantly more than the original, though my reviews have kind of revealed I also did not give the original enough credit either. Regardless, Computer Love is easily the highlight of the mix for me personally. But the rest that I haven't already mentioned isn't quite as impressive, honestly. Like, Abzug and Metal on Metal, while cool and still pretty fun to listen to, are not quite as captivating to me as the new Trans-Europe Express mix, though that could also just be my nostalgia talking. And the robots, I'm just kind of all over the place on. It's fun, and again, I've said before, this version has more of the nostalgia factor, but also it runs a bit long, and it just doesn't hold a candle to the original. And less excusable is Home Computer, which just does take away a lot of the atmosphere the original had, and I was just turned off by it right from the outset. And Music Non-Stop, which makes that main vocal snippet hook sound terrible. I don't mean the boing boom shock part, that was fine, that didn't change. I mean the pa-pa tick part. That was also a major disappointment when I heard that for the first time, especially that tick. I mean, it sounds, ugh. But probably the worst is actually Pocket Calculator and especially Dentaku. I'm not sure what precisely went wrong here, but this particular version seems to have sucked out a lot of the melody and charm out of it. The former at least has a little bit of charm left in there. I mean, it's still Pocket Calculator. And, you know, that glitchy keyboard solo in the middle has admittedly been growing on me a little, but Dentaku, ooh. Jeez, this is inexcusable. Like, they take out the calculator sound effects altogether and use this ridiculous generated voice that just sounds terrible. I have no idea what they were thinking with this one. Okay, the arrangements themselves are a bit of a mixed bag, pun sort of intended. But that brings us to the second major criticism I see on this compilation. A lot of people seem to think that the mix has no energy and doesn't make people want to dance. Okay, I can see this varies from person to person. There are definitely tracks on here that do still make me want to dance, but about the whole no energy thing, I will have to concede that ironically, the mix does in fact drop the ball in the mixing department. People have said this compilation often sounds flat and sterile, and there I will unfortunately have to agree. It does all sound rather flat. And one unfortunate obvious example is, yes, Computer Love, which, like, there, the bass line's rather understated. Kind of prevents me from getting more of an emotional high than I would otherwise. And this is kind of the case across the board. Nothing ever really pops out at you or gets you pumped. And really, I do think this is just some kind of mixing issue. I mean, surprisingly, I think the only track on here that really sounded mixed well and energetic was, weirdly enough, Radioactivity. The orchestra and choirs give this track more of a sense of space and atmosphere, and as I said, the bass line was really tight. It actually did get me moving. Not sure why that one had to be, of all the tracks that works, the best of all these years, given the nostalgia factor isn't even close to as strong, but yeah, that one's actually pretty good. But the reason why there's really not a good excuse for this mixing now is they later came out with Minimum Maximum, which also just sounds far, far, far better. There are a lot of tracks on here that borrow much more in their arrangements from the mix than they do from the originals, but by putting everything in a live context, they give everything more energy and more bass resonance, and it's all much more satisfying to listen to. Plus there's just more of it. It's basically the mix, but on steroids. In fact, the only track from the mix that does not appear on here is, unfortunately, Computer Love. Which, okay, yeah, I might be a little pissed off by, but point is, basically, every single one of these arrangements sounds better here. Maybe with the exception of Autobahn. I think I like the mix version a little better there, just from an arrangement standpoint, but the rest, definitely a step up. Trans-Europe Express is now great through its entire suite, including Metal on Metal. Like, just hearing those metal bangs at the beginning come down with so much more impact. It's just super satisfying. And also what used to be the Abzug section, now it's just merged into Trans-Europe Express. Also, this section just has a lot more haunting and atmospheric feel to it. is just more effective across the board. Home computer brings back some of the original's charm. Music non-stop, while much longer and more meandering, does still sound much better and is much easier to get into. Even Radioactivity is better here, as it also combines elements from the original version of the track, and also adds this super menacing, like, vocoder or whatever voice intro. It's excellent. Oh yeah, and Dentaku! I kinda hate the version from the mix, but this version, again, it's way better. Even better than this version of Pocket Calculator, might I add. First of all, Ralph Witter actually sings it, instead of, you know, leaving it up to that awful generated voice. But it also has the same energy, if not more energy, than the original, aided by the crowd also singing along with him. It's great. But guess what? There's even more. There's plenty of tracks here, obviously, that are added on. Also with new arrangements. There's the much more erratic and fun new version of Numbers. That was really good. There's Planet of Visions, which is the more energetic reworking of their Expo 2000 single, which, as I mentioned, is already a pretty awesome track. Yeah, I'll admit I heard this version first, actually, and I do kind of wish it didn't end so quickly. I think the original single version sounded cooler, maybe even more futuristic, but still awesome. Even the new mixes of tracks from Tour de France soundtracks are great. The new arrangement of the Tour de France suite, while admittedly not as impressive in this abbreviated form, is still lots of fun and sounds great. Tour de France, the song, has this fantastic intro that's, like, just... oh, love it. And Aerodynamic has these cool wavering organ-like sounds in the beginning and are also added throughout that really help add to that track's atmosphere too, but from Tour de France, the real revelation is surprisingly Vitamin, which has a much stronger bass line than the original, and honestly sounds even better, despite, again, being shorter. If there's any complaints, I suppose none of the tracks from The Man Machine sound better than the original counterparts. The actual track, The Man Machine, while a bit more menacing, is also extended out maybe a bit too long. The model and Neon Lights are basically unchanged from the original. I guess Neon Lights is, you know, more concise. And the Robots also retains the same complaints I had with the mixed version. In fact, even though this version I think is a little shorter, I think I enjoyed it less. Though, probably it's because it's near the end of the album, and by that point, I get a little Kraftwerked out. In fact, this latter point is actually probably my main criticism of Minimum Maximum. I do tend to get an itch to stop listening to Kraftwerk whenever I'm done with it. Now, I could just easily blame this on having listened the crap out of it in middle school. Like, I remember quite often, just staying up late at night and listening to this entire thing, like, several different days, and I remember having a lot of fun. So, you know, point is, I don't remember having this problem back when I first got the CD in middle school, but it is more of a problem now, so, So I guess that leaves the question of whether I recommend the mix or Minimum Maximum. I think both are worth at least one listen for Kraftwerk fans, but I also have not yet listened to 3D the Catalog, because I plan on saving an entire video for that. And if it is good enough, then I might take back my recommendation for the mix. What the mix still has going for it is novelty for any Kraftwerk fans who somehow have never heard it and want to hear up-to-date versions. And I still very much enjoy these arrangements of Computer Love and Autobahn in particular. We'll see if those get replaced by the 3D the Catalog versions. And, you know, 3D the Catalog also has the mix in it, so we'll see. But I'm not going to take back my recommendation for Minimum Maximum, because I already know 3D the Catalog does not have crowd noise. I think crowd noise does always help in terms of getting more energy out of you when you're listening to live albums, so yeah, I still recommend checking out Minimum Maximum at some point. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm not going to give either the mix or Minimum Maximum a numerical scores. They're just different versions of tracks I've already discussed in other reviews. But of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.